Germany, 1944. Over 216,000 Jews from Eastern Europe were taken by force.
On the counts of the indictment on which you have been convicted, the tribunal sentences you to death by hanging.
Several war crimes were carried out during the Second World War, including some horrendous ones inside the concentration camps, and others outside during conflict.
Der Spaten ist ein Symbol einer neuen Gemeinschaft geworden.
After the war, many of the perpetrators who committed crimes against humanity were tried. Some of them killed innocent civilians, while others executed prisoners of war. One man who did both was Anton Dostler. This is the story of how German Nazi General Anton Dostler committed war crimes, massacred 15 Americans, and begged for mercy during his trial and execution. Dostler's life before World War II.
Dann wird es mir schwer zu sprechen. Uns allen geht das Herz über. Vor Freude über euch.
Anton Dostler was born in Munich, German Empire, on May 10, 1891. When Dostler turned 19 in the year 1910, he joined the 16th Infantry Regiment of the Bavarian Army as a cadet. 2 years later, he got a promotion to the rank of lieutenant. On the 28th of July, 1914, the First World War began, and Dostler participated in the war as a junior officer. In January 1916, he got another promotion, this time to Oberleutnant, also known as a first lieutenant. He continued to impress and was promoted again to Hauptmann, a rank equivalent to a captain, in the year 1918. Dostler was, therefore, a captain when the First World War ended on November 11, 1918. The German leaders agreed to and signed the armistice in the Compiègne forest in France. Military promotion wasn't the only thing Dostler earned during the war. He also received recognition for his gallantry during World War I. He received both classes of the Iron Cross, as well as the Bavarian Military Merit Order, the German Empire's main decorations awarded to military officers who showed bravery and military merit.
The United States finally declared war on Germany April 6, 1917. Meanwhile, war efforts in Russia were growing unpopular. Their economy was near collapse, and food shortages led to protests from civilians.
After ending the First World War in 1918, negotiations continued until the Treaty of Versailles was signed on the 28th of June, 1919. This was the most important treaty that officially ended the war between Germany and most of the Allied powers. The treaty included restrictions that forbade Weimar, as the German Empire was known from 1918 to 1933, from having more than 100,000 men in their military. Under the newly formed army known as Reichswehr, many soldiers were demobilized, but Dostler remained in service. In October 1924, Dostler was transferred to the Military Intelligence Department of the Reichswehr Ministry in Berlin. He began studying at the local university and got another promotion in 1932 to Major. Hitler.
Meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe.
In January 1933, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came into power. Hitler managed to secure the allegiance of the German military. While the top army officials did not agree totally with Hitler's ideologies, the two parties managed to reach an agreement on certain subjects that made the army pledge allegiance to him. One of the reasons why the military agreed to follow Hitler was because he was the one who successfully rebuilt the military after their humiliation stemming from the Versailles Treaty following the end of World War I. Hitler also promised the German military to help them wage war against their adversaries in France and the Soviet Union. To further draw support towards himself, Hitler gave systematic bribes to various generals. They received extra pay as well as gifts, such as lands and houses. In August 1934, the German military switched its oath of allegiance from obedience to the German Constitution to total obedience to the Führer.
Like a modern Caesar, he stands on the balcony to receive the salutes of the athletes of 50 nations.
In 1935, Jews were prohibited from joining the military, and those already in service were dismissed in agreement with Nazi racial law that considered Jews and some other races as lesser humans. By 1938, Hitler had become the supreme commander of the German military, and the German armed forces submitted to Nazi ideologies. Hitler was able to gain their respect by seizing multiple territories, including Austria and Czechoslovakia, without war. The armed forces at this time had also bolstered its ranks, mainly through young soldiers joining from the Hitler Youth movement. As Hitler set to extend his influence all over Germany, the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls was the youth version of the Nazi Party. It was designed to introduce Nazi ideologies and policies to children and juveniles. This group also prepared young Germans for war, and many of them transitioned into the SS and German. World War II.
September 1939. The German foe begins its ruthless march of conquest and sets the stage for World War II.
On the 1st of September, 1939, the Second World War began with the invasion of Poland. Some military top officials did not approve of the atrocities carried out by the Nazis in Poland, but then quickly looked the other way when Germany crushed France in May and June 1940. Germany continued to show superior military strength and invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, in a campaign codenamed Operation Barbarossa. During the war, a new task force was formed from Hitler's Schutzstaffel, or SS paramilitary group. They were known as the Einsatzgruppen, and their job was to carry out mass murder on behalf of Hitler in German-occupied regions of Europe, usually by shooting.
There is life here, though most of the story is death. Death. At Hadamar, an insane asylum served the mad Hun well.
In total, this mobile killing squad massacred between 1.5 and 2 million Jews, including men, women, and children, in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. The Einsatzgruppen had the support of the German military, and they were allowed to carry out killings in the rear of the German lines. Various reports and liaison offices showed that the German army knew about the atrocities of the Einsatzgruppen, but they chose not to object to any of Hitler's barbaric orders or the horrific crimes. Their only objection regarding Operation Barbarossa was that Hitler did not keep to the schedule earlier agreed on for the invasion. Not only did they turn a blind eye to the killings, but members of the German military also joined in killing Jews and other prisoners of war. Anton Dostler was one of such German military officers. Anton Dostler's war crimes.
Anton Dostler was born on the 10th of May 1891 in Munich, then part of the German Empire.
As Germany and its allies invaded the Soviet Union, Anton Dostler was the commander of the 57th Infantry Division, a part of Army Group South that attacked Kiev. At this time, Army Group South was under the leadership of Walter von Reichenau, popularly known as the Bull, a self-declared Nazi. Reichenau, as leader of the Army Group South, under which Dostler was serving, was the one who issued the notorious Severity Order, which encouraged German soldiers to murder Jewish civilians on the Eastern Front. The Army Group South was in cooperation with the Einsatzgruppen, SS, and Ukrainian auxiliaries, as they massacred 33,000 Jews in Babi Yar.
While other Sonderkommandos were tasked with excavating the grave pits and hauling the bodies to the burning areas. On one side, a furnace was being erected, said Sonderkommando Yakov Karper.
The mass murder of the Jewish population at Babi Yar was considered one of the largest massacres in a single place during World War II. The Einsatzgruppen reported to headquarters that they murdered 33,771 Jewish men, women, and children within 48 hours. Most of those murdered consisted of the old, children, sick people, people living with disabilities, and other weak individuals who weren't able to escape before the Nazi soldiers and their allies arrived. In 1942, between the months of June and December, Dostler was in charge of the 163rd Infantry Division, which fought with the Finnish Army during the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. The division was in Finland for most of the war and moved to Norway in 1944. Dostler got a promotion to General Lieutenant, an equivalent of Major General, on January 1, 1943. He stood temporarily at Corps for some time, and on the 8th of September, 1943, Badoglio, an Italian general, announced the unconditional surrender of the Italians to the Allies. Meanwhile, the Germans were wary of the loyalty of the Italians and moved swiftly to occupy central Italy and Italian-controlled regions in Greece, Yugoslavia, and France. SS soldiers freed Benito Mussolini, an Italian fascist leader, from prison. Mussolini was installed as the leader of a pro-German Italian social republic with a base in Salo, northern Italy. On the 15th of January, 1944, the 75th Army Corps was created in Frankfurt am Main, and Dostler was made the commander. A week and some days later, on the 24th, the division was transported to Liguria in Italy through Munich and Verona. The 75th Army Corps, under Dostler's command, was saddled with the responsibility of defending the Ligurian coast. They were also expected to construct fortifications in Elba and around Genoa, Livorno, and La Spezia. This went on until July 1944, when the front line advanced toward Liguria from the south. Operation Ginny. On the 22nd of March, 1944, Operation Ginny 2 commenced with the landing of 15 United States soldiers, including 2 officers, at the Italian coast, about 15 kilometers north of La Spezia and 400 kilometers behind the front line. These U.S. soldiers were all dressed in the U.S. Army field uniform and did not carry any civilian clothing. They were tasked with demolishing a tunnel in Fremura along the railway line that connected Genoa and La Spezia. After 48 hours of searching for the target without any success, they were captured by the German Army troops. Operation Ginny consisted of 2 sabotage missions conducted by the United States Office of Strategic Services, OSS. The OSS, which was formed in June 1942 by General William J. Donovan to carry out special missions, recruited First Lieutenant Vincent Russo and 14 other soldiers. Some of them were recruited because they could speak Italian, which would help them communicate with the local population. Operation Ginny 1, the first mission, was carried out on the 27th and 28th of February, 1944. When the party arrived at the supposed location, Russo noticed they were at the wrong location when he heard the train northeast of him. They had landed south of the objective instead. The men wanted to stay back and be picked the following night, but the senior officer rejected the idea. Operation Ginny 1 failed, and the OSS team aborted the mission. The mission objective remained the same for Operation Ginny 2, but some of the personnel were changed. Like Ginny 1, they dressed in proper United States Army uniforms. The men had automatic pistols and fighting knives, while 6 of them carried machine guns. Again, the men found themselves in the wrong spot. They had landed near Carpingio, about 1 mile from the intended spot. After failing to establish contact with their patrol boat, they decided to hide during the day and try contacting again the next night. They hid their rubber boats, explosives, and other equipment under trees and moved quietly till they found a barn where they could hide. Russo and another officer found a farmer who helped them, but the patrol boat could not come to pick them up the next night. After an Italian fisherman found the boats and reported to authorities, Italian militiamen went to investigate and found the explosives. The German command started searching the area, and when they got to the barn where the men were hiding, a clash broke out, which ended with the capture of the 15 American soldiers. They were transported to La Spezia and imprisoned near the 135th Fortress Brigade headquarters, under the command of Colonel Kurt Ammers. The crime that sentenced him.
His appeals were unsuccessful, and the 15 Americans of the commando raid were executed on the morning of the 26th of March, 1944, at Punta Bianca south of La Spezia, in the municipality of Amelia.
The 135th Division was under the 75th Army Corps, headed by Anton Dostler. Colonel Kurt Ammers invited Wehrmacht intelligence officers who interrogated the 15 American soldiers in captivity. They could not extract any useful information from 14 of the soldiers, but lied to the remaining soldier that they already had information about their mission from the others, tricking the soldier into revealing the details. Kurt Ammers sent a message to his superior officer, Anton Dostler, that they had captured a party of U.S. soldiers on a commando raid. The next day, Dostler informed his superior officer, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who was the commanding general of all German armed forces in Italy. Dostler told Kesselring of the mission and asked for advice on how to proceed. Kesselring commanded the execution of the American commandos. Dostler, in turn, sent a telegram to Ammers of the 135th Brigade, ordering the commandos to be executed. But this caught Ammers by surprise. He knew the American commandos were prisoners of war since they were in the U.S. Army uniform, and executing prisoners of war was a violation of the Geneva Convention of 1929. Ammers sent another message to Dostler asking for confirmation or a delay of the execution, but Dostler sent another telegram commanding Ammers to proceed with the execution. That's because Adolf Hitler had issued a commando order in 1942, stipulating that any Allied commando captured in Europe and Africa should be executed without a trial, irrespective of whether they were in proper uniform or even attempted to surrender. One of the staff members of Dostler, Alexander Zudona Schlobitten, was unaware of Hitler's commando order and refused to sign the order for the execution of the American commandos. He was dismissed from the Wehrmacht for insubordination. Ammers made 2 more attempts to stop or delay the execution, but he was unsuccessful in changing the orders. On the 26th of March, 1944, the 15 American soldiers on a commando raid were executed at Punta Bianca, southern La Spezia, with their U.S. Army uniforms still on them. After the execution, their bodies were buried in a mass grave which was immediately camouflaged. Dostler moved on with his life, like nothing had happened. He was commander of the Venetian coast from September to November 1994, before he was reassigned to the 73rd Army Corps. He was with this division until the end of World War II on the 2nd of September, 1945. End of war, trial, and execution.
The trial rejected the superior order's defense, as Dostler mounted a defense on the grounds that he had ordered the execution only because he himself was obeying superior orders.
By 1945, Nazi Germany was no more. The Red Army, as well as the Allied forces, were invading Germany. On the 30th of April 1945, the Soviet Union's Red Army was close to the Reich Chancellery when Hitler and his wife committed suicide by gunshot to evade capture. After Adolf Hitler committed suicide, Admiral Karl Dönitz took over from Hitler as the head of state on May 1945. Not long after, Dönitz fled to Flensburg, close to the Danish border, and formed a cabinet. This was to become the second and last government of the Third Reich. When he was in power, Hitler attempted to cause a rift between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies. If American and British armies could turn on the Soviets, they could join Germany to fight the Soviet Red Army. This was the same strategy Dönitz hoped to use, and he was in last resort territory. After German troops surrendered in Europe, Dönitz sent Jodl to discuss the conditions of surrender. On May 7, 1945, German forces laid down their weapons and submitted to the Allied forces in Reims, France. Dostler was one of those taken prisoner after the defeat of Nazi Germany. The United States Army learned about the fate of the 15 commandos who were summarily executed under Dostler's command. They searched for Dostler to be taken prisoner of war. On the 8th of May, 1945, he was put on trial for his war crimes. Unlike the American soldiers, he had the opportunity of a gore hearing. At the Royal Palace in Caserta, the Supreme Allied Commander's seat, a military tribunal was held on the 8th of October. Dostler was tried at the first Allied war crimes trial by the U.S., where he was accused of putting an illegal order into action. Dostler's defense was that he was not responsible for ordering the execution and carrying it out. He maintained that he only passed an order of a superior Field Marshal Kesselring to Colonel Ammers, and that the execution was a lawful order that he had no option but to follow. He went on to explain that only his superiors could be held responsible for the crime. Dostler also stated that the men were wearing civilian clothing with no distinctive markings to recognize them as Americans, and thus, they had no protection that was afforded to prisoners of war. However, the men's bodies were found, and it was clear that they wore standard United States uniforms. The tribunal rejected Dostler's plea and ruled that he acted on his own outside the Führer's orders by commanding the mass execution of the American commandos. Dostler also begged for mercy, but his plea of clemency was turned down by the military commissioner, who declared that the killing of the American soldiers was a direct violation of Article 2 of the 1929 Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War.
The tribunal sits in judgment upon 20 leaders of the Nazi Party, after a first day spent in reading the 30,000-word indictment. The unemotional tones of Lord Justice Lawrence.
The convention stated clearly that acts of reprisals against prisoners of war were prohibited. According to the Military Commission, no soldier, and still less a commanding general, can be heard to say that he considered the summary shooting of prisoners of war legitimate, even as a reprisal. The Hague Convention on Land Warfare, 1907, allowed the execution of spies and saboteurs who were not in the proper military uniform disguise. Since the 15 American soldiers had their proper uniforms on without any disguise, they qualified as prisoners of war and should not have been executed like spies. At the end of the trial, it was ruled that Dostler violated an important principle. His case set an important precedent that was later included in Principle 4 of the Nuremberg Principles and the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It stipulated that criminals of war would not be excused based on a superior order. On the 12th of October, 1945, Dostler was found guilty of war crimes and therefore sentenced to death by musketry. On September 1, 1945, the prisoner guard escorted Dostler to the execution party. Everyone listened as his charges, findings, and sentences were read aloud. Then, they granted Dostler a brief moment with the Roman Catholic chaplain. After that, 3 soldiers tied Dostler to a post with his hands behind him. A medical officer covered his face and head with a black hood and placed a 4-inch wide target in front of his heart. It was time for the 12-man firing squad to take position 50 feet from Dostler. After the officer in charge gave the firing command, the shots were fired at once and Dostler's body slumped forward. His body was lifted, covered in a white cotton mattress cover, and placed on a stretcher. He was placed in an army truck which drove him to the German war cemetery in Pomezia, Italy, where he was buried. As for Kesselring, many Italians came to recognize the name as it appeared on many of the posters and orders that were announcing the harsh conditions that came with the German occupation. He became synonymous with the horrific conditions they faced during the German occupation. As the list of atrocities and their perpetrators was drawn, Kesselring's name was at the top of the list. When Kesselring's trial began on the 17th of February, 1947, he was arraigned on 2 charges: the killing of over 300 Italians in the Ardeatine massacre and the incitement to kill Italian civilians. He escaped being complicit in the killing of the 15 American soldiers by claiming he never heard of them. However, he was found guilty of the 2 charges against him and was sentenced to death by firing squad, which was believed to be more honorable than hanging. Back at Nuremberg, the SS was ruled a criminal organization, but no such ruling was passed on the military. Only the top officers were tried for war crimes. Even after the war in Germany, the military was not legally prosecuted, despite the evidence pointing to the fact that the military supported Hitler and participated in the genocidal missions, especially the mass murder of Jewish men, women, and children. Anton Dostler's story highlights some of the horrific crimes that were perpetrated by the Nazi regime and the German military during the Second World War. With this, we remember the victims and honor their memories. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.